Welcome to Taking Care of Business on News Talk 1180 KERN for the best in Saturday talk radio at 1 o'clock and on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock Saturday, and for the best in Wednesday talk radio on 1410 KER, the Christian station. We are now on 1000 KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and also 3 times a week on the internet nationwide through knookmedia.com. Plus, you can catch any of our shows for the last 4 years at the Clay and Marty Show. Your host is Clay Koerner, and I'm Marty Pay, and our producer is Greg Held. Hey, Clay, we had a great show last week with our Waleed and Waleed show, Waleed Ferris and Wally Amos from Famous Cookies. Cookies.
Did you order any cookies?
No, did you?
I'm going to today.
Okay.
I told him I would, so I guess I better, huh?
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
We've got a great show today. In the second half, we have Kerry Bowles talking about his ministry. And in the first half, though, we have a gentleman we've had on the phone several times, combat historian. I love his books, author of a great new book. I'm right in the middle of it, called The First Seals, Patrick O'Donnell. Patrick, welcome back to Taking Care of Business.
Great to be back with you guys.
I love your books, Patrick. I really do.
Thank you very much, Marty. That means a lot to me.
Oh, I don't know why. That would mean a lot from Marty.
Well, he's a Marine.
Oh, there you
so
go.
So that's always a good compliment. And then, I know you really carefully read these books and get into them. And, I've always enjoyed coming on your shows because the questions are probing and detailed, and that's always a treat for an author.
Well, it's funny. I was looking at your list of books, and I think, let's see, I've read, or listened to, I should say, because I do books on tape.
Unless it has pictures, he can't understand it, so he listens to them.
I think I've gone through 4 or 5 of your books, and they've all been fantastic. And since I'm a frustrated history teacher, I wanted to be a history teacher when I was growing up. Your books are they're just fantastic, and I'm really enjoying this new one, First Seals. That's really a fantastic book. Talking about the SEALs going all the way back to World War II, and really their roots are really more in the English Secret Service, aren't they?
Well, not quite. I mean, there's a link in the sense that you've got Commander H.G.M. Woolley, who's this World War I veteran that is also commando in the SOE and other does other activities. And while Bill Donovan from the OSS picks him to sort of head up this entire organization. But Woolley's fascinating. He's an American as well as a Brit. And prior to the war, he's a scriptwriter in Hollywood, California. And after the war, he's full-blown American citizen, and he heads up the World Bank. But this guy is extraordinary. He can take an idea and really kind of craft it into reality and build consensus and everything else. And, for instance, we didn't have scuba gear or a rebreather, as it was called. This is what modern-day SEALs use to swim underwater and not have the telltale sign of bubbles that would give away their operations. And this technology didn't exist in 1942. And Woolley, along with the other character, sort of a main character in this book, Jack Taylor, Commander Jack Taylor from the U.S. Navy, really, they do some extraordinary things.
There's some interesting characters in your book. One of the guys that really surprised me was Sterling Hayden.
I think it's he's probably my favorite character in First Seals, and this book is really a rich stew of characters that are just completely interesting. Sterling Hayden, of course, was a famous movie actor. That if you've watched Dr. Strangelove, this is General Jack Ripper, and then he's in The Godfather and a lot of other movies. But Hayden was the real deal. That's what I loved about him. He really was a patriot, and he even changed his name to John Hamilton. During the war, so that he would try to blend in. It didn't quite work out that well, but this guy did some incredible missions behind the lines. And what I loved about him is the way he talks about his experiences. It's very, self-actualized. This man kind of understands war and sort of the hardships that go along with it, even though His war was different than a lot of like an infantryman, for instance, in the Second World War. This guy was a spy behind the lines, or a special operative, a SEAL, if you will. And, his missions are very interesting.
When you look at the history of the SEALs, then you look at today's SEALs, I am always amazed at the training they have to go through and how few of the ones that start actually finish. Did they have the same type of training when they first started out?
They did. But the other thing is that the OSS had this incredible selection process. They picked the right people to start with. And that selection process is actually still, the SEALs and the Green Berets try to duplicate it, where they select the right individual. But these guys were kind of Renaissance men. They weren't trigger pullers or anything like that, but they were also great athletes at the same time, amazing swimmers, many of them Olympic caliber or national champions. And then they were thoughtful, brilliant men. And I think the best way to describe it was a quote from Donovan: "We want guys that can, PhDs that can win a bar fight."
Yeah, I love that quote.
That's what the guys in the maritime unit were.
Mm-hmm. I love that quote. We're having a conversation with Patrick O'Donnell, combat historian.
Hey, Patrick, the Navy has the SEALs. What does the Army, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard and those other guys have? The Marines.
The Green Berets have something very similar. They have an underwater unit that is very similar to the SEALs in the sense, and they were formed in the 1950s and 60s as well. They don't get quite as much credit. They're a little more quiet about a lot of their operations, etc. But they're very Green Berets are very active right now, for instance, in Iraq. And the Coast Guard has something similar, and as well as the Air Force to rescue downed airmen, etc. Each branch has something similar, but it's the Navy SEALs that have kind of what you see with the maritime unit of the OSS was 4 decades ahead of its time. They blended special operations and intelligence together and conducted parachute operations as well as underwater operations and naval kind of maritime unit operations in one package. And it's a lot like what the Navy SEALs are doing today.
It's going back to Sterling Hayden for a minute. He, I guess, wrote an autobiography, and I'm going to pick that book up because he was just so fascinating in your book. And it's funny because the other night I was listening to him or watching him on one of my favorite movies, Blue and Gray, was on, and he played John Brown. He did a great job playing John Brown in that movie. But anyways, he made a comment that I thought was pretty profound on life. He said, you can pick either a bankruptcy of funds and finance or a bankruptcy of life. If you get caught into finances your whole life, then you're kind of in this one niche and you'll never get out of it and you'll never enjoy life. I thought that was an interesting perspective on life, especially coming from a movie star.
I thought it was the one thing, if anybody ever read my book, if they took away one thing, that might be it. Because Sterling Hayden lived life to the full every minute. And I admire him for that. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't do. They get caught up in material things. They get caught up on things that really don't matter that much. And that's why I said kind of early on he was a very self-actualized guy. And his autobiography is called The Wanderer, and it's a great book. He sailed around the world. He kind of did his own thing, and he was an independent man, and I respect him and admire him, and that's one of the reasons why he's such an interesting character in First SEALs.
Patrick, this is Clay. I always like to get to the sort of the personal side of people, because talking to you over the telephone here, we really don't know you, and I'm always interested as to why and how. And as an example with you, why and how did you become a combat historian?
I think I earned that title, and that is in 2004. I volunteered to go to Iraq. I didn't get paid by anyone. I spent my own money. I bought a plane ticket, and I went to go to get the stories of our men and women, mainly our men, that are fighting today. And I didn't think that story was being told. at least in their own words. So I went and I volunteered, and my Iraq experience is very much an extension of what I started in 1992, where I was interviewing World War II veterans. And I went over there, and I realized right away that you can't just sit behind a desk or the wire and interview people. They don't have any respect for you at all. And I wore a Marine Corps uniform, and I was armed because I didn't want to die. And I ended up fighting in a Marine rifle platoon through the whole Battle of Fallujah. And for the first time, I think, or one of the first times, I gathered the stories as they occurred in that battle. And the book that I wrote is called We Were One, and it's sort of a relic of Fallujah in the sense that those stories, those voices of those men are trapped in kind of amber as it was going on. And it's a very very raw, emotional book. Most of the platoon, a lot of the men were, almost everyone was wounded. I barely escaped with my life. I was almost killed by Chechens, a precursor to ISIS.
Yeah, Pat, we're hitting a break. Let's pick up there when we come back, because that's a fascinating story, and that was another great book as We Were One. We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.